Thanks for joining us at xam.com for this special report. We'll be taking a closer look at the US dollar. I'm Christina Marujos, and joining me today is senior investment analyst Raf Boyajian. We saw the dollar gradually lose its safe haven shine in 2020, so much so that by the end of the year, it was down by 6.5% against a basket of currencies. The currency hasn't premiered strongly in 2021 either, Rafi, despite the fact that America's economy is expected to outperform that of its peers. What is the greenbacks outlook moving into 2021? And can the US's twin deficits pose a problem?
Well, Christina, certainly the market's view that the dollar will suffer more losses in 2021. But lately, we have seen the US dollar consolidating against most currencies. We did see some fresh lows early in January, but since then, it has been pretty much moving in a more sideways pattern. And there's been this question brewing in recent weeks that has too much optimism been priced into the markets, because we are seeing some problem with the vaccine rollouts, particularly in Europe, which not only national governments have been very slow to distribute the vaccines, but there's also some supply issues there. And even in the US is behind other countries such as Israel and the UK. So this view that everything will go back to normal by the end of the year, that may be over optimistic. And we also have, as you mentioned, that the US economy will probably outperform. And as a result, the inflation expectations for the US have been edging higher. So there's this question of how long will the Fed be able to stay on hold. Now, having said all that, if you look at some other fundamentals, it does suggest that the dollar should depreciate further in 2021. So we've got this twin deficits problem in the US there, that it started to become a problem during the Trump era. We saw Trump's tax cuts pushing the national debt level much higher. And the US also has the large current account deficit. So even with Trump's protectionist policies, the US trade deficit widened under his presidency. And those two deficits could deteriorate further under Biden, because if Biden's stimulus plans get approved, then we're going to get an even bigger budget deficit, and we're also likely to see more imports if the stimulus boosts consumption. So all of that suggests that the dollar should depreciate at some point, even if we see some consolidation in the near term. And then looking at other aspects as well, for example, purchasing power parity, which looks at the real exchange rate value between currencies. So one popular measure is the Big Mac index. Now, of course, this isn't to be taken too seriously, but still it does give us something to think about. So on that basis, the US, even after those declines in 2020, the US still was one of the most overvalued currencies. So if you look at those arguments, then the dollar downtrend is far from over.
Now, currencies that came under pressure when the pandemic first broke seem to be regaining momentum lately, with the pound maybe being the brightest example as it gained on the success of the vaccine rollout in the UK. There is some volatility in the euro, and the yen has been quite subdued in all this. How can the dollar fare against these currencies in the next few months?
Well, you're right in suggesting that there are different dynamics between some of those currencies. So looking at the pound first, is mainly being propped up at the moment by the success of the vaccine rollout in the UK. Aside from that, the UK has suffered the most in terms of the pandemic, in terms of the contraction in GDP, and the lockdowns across much of the UK will likely last well into the spring. So the near-term picture is pretty grim, but investors are hoping that the fast rollout of the vaccines will mean the UK economy will be able to reopen in the second half of the year. But if we do see the pandemic becoming less of a priority, if things do improve, then there's other problems in the UK. For example, the current Brexit deal between the UK and the EU is causing a lot of disruption between trade between the two economic blocs. So that could be one problem that could resurface. For now, though, the pound is looking pretty bullish based purely on those vaccine hopes. Now, it's quite a contrast across the euro area, because Eurozone countries have not only been slow to roll out their vaccines for their population, but there's also some supply issues hitting the EU. So there could be shortages of vaccines soon if those issues aren't resolved. There's also question marks about whether or not the fiscal stimulus that was only recently passed, which was meant for the first lockdown from last year, will that be enough to stimulate the Eurozone economy, given that we've had fresh lockdowns at the end of 2020 and in January as well. And aside from that, the European Central Bank has made it pretty clear that it does not want to see the euro rise. So all of that poses problems for the euro. So as far as euro dollar is concerned, although the euro dollar, one of the best performers in 2020, the pair could actually struggle in 2021. Finally, looking at the yen, of course, the yen compared to the other currencies is somewhat more stable. The outlook is not so straightforward. Now, if you have a look at the Big Max index, the yen is actually surprisingly the most undervalued currency among the majors. So that actually could become problematic for Japanese authorities, which have made it clear they don't want to see dollar yen fall below the 100 level. And that could happen pretty soon, actually. If the dollar resumes its downtrend, it's fairly close to the 100 level. And if that were to happen, would the Japanese government intervene to prop up the yen? If it does, that could cause big problems between the two countries. It could create a row. So a lot of things to consider there as far as the outlook is concerned for 2021.
Rafi, thank you for joining me today. This was a special report on the US dollar. Thanks for watching at xm.com.